I'm nearing the end of this project. It's about a 00 size steel string, European spruce top, Paduke on the back and sides, and ebony bindings. And it is time now to glue the bridge on. I masked off the area where I thought the bridge should go before I put on the finish. That way I don't have to scrape any lacquer off right where the bridge is. Before I actually glue it on, I'm going to recheck my measurements, of course. I made a little pyramid bridge out of ebony, and at each end of the saddle slot I drilled some pilot holes so that I could put some locating pins to always come back to the same position. So that was where I measured the right spot to be before I started the finish. But I'm going to double check everything. Wanted to take a couple minutes and talk about bridge compensation, because I'm surprised in talking to guitar players how often they don't really understand what that's all about. So I'm just going to give a brief explanation of it, nothing too scientific, but what it boils down to is theoretically where the bridge should sit is the distance from the nut to the 12th fret multiplied by 2. And that's the theoretical stopping point for the bridge. However, what happens as you move up the neck when you're playing the guitar, the higher up you go, the more you distort the string every time you fret a note. Even down at the first fret, in the first few frets, you do distort the string some, but the higher up you go, the more you distort it. And by distorting the string, by pushing it down to meet the fret, you make the pitch of the string go sharp from where it would otherwise be. So in order to offset that effect or compensate for that effect, the bridge gets moved backward a little bit from where it should be theoretically to where it actually winds up needing to be in order to get pretty decent intonation on all the frets. With a steel string guitar, that works out to be, at the middle of the saddle, it works out to be about 1/8 of an inch. It depends a little bit on the scale length. Shorter scales need a little bit, like, thousandths of an inch longer compensation than longer scales, because with each fretted note you're proportionally distorting the string just a little bit more on a shorter scale. So anyway, at the middle of the saddle slot, I want the bridge to be 1/8 of an inch farther away from the 12th fret than the distance from the nut to the 12th fret. When it comes to calculating bridge compensation, I prefer to just use the metric system because the math is easier. So this is a 24 3/4 inch scale. And in metric terms, the distance from the nut to the 12th fret is just about 315 millimeters. Looks like 314.5. So that means at the middle of the saddle slot, halfway between the two E strings, I would want 314.5 times 2, or 629, plus 1/8 of an inch, which works out to 3 millimeters. So I would want the middle of my saddle slot to be at 632 millimeters, which it is. Now you see that the saddle slopes from the treble string to the bass string, and that's because the thicker diameter strings, as you push down to fret those strings, they're stiffer and they distort more than the thinner strings, and that means their pitch distorts or sharpens more than a thinner string. So the thinner strings don't need nearly as much compensation as the fatter strings. When I make bridges for steel string guitars, I usually make this saddle slot slope 1/8 of an inch from the treble E down to the bass E. So what that means is I had 3 millimeters of compensation, which happens to be 1/8 of an inch. I had 3 millimeters compensation right in the middle. I only need 1.5 millimeters at the treble E, and I need 4.5 millimeters at the bass E. So I double check that, and that looks okay. Now I make my saddle slots pretty wide. This is, boy, 1/8 of an inch is coming up an awful lot in this presentation. But my saddle slot is 1/8 of an inch. So I do the measurements to the middle of the saddle slot. Before I string up the guitar, I'll crown the saddle so that it peaks right in the middle. But then I've got a 1/16 of an inch to play with in either direction if I need to make some fine adjustment to the intonation. But that's what there is to bridge compensation. It's just the idea of moving the bridge a little farther away from where it should be in theory, and offsetting the fact that as you play up the neck, you're distorting the strings every time you press down on one of them to fret a note. And of course, the other thing I check is the side-to-side alignment. I want to make sure the bridge is right where it should be from side to side, so I use my straight edge and hold it right over the middle of the treble E string and right over the middle of the bass E string, and I look at where my straight edge is in relation to the edge of the fretboard. So this is one of the last really critical things to do on a guitar, is get the bridge glued on in the right position, because if it's not where it should be, it doesn't matter how pretty it is or how great the sound is, nobody's going to like it because it doesn't play in tune. Next thing I'm going to do is mask off right around the bridge, because when I glue it on, there's going to be a little bit of glue squeeze out, and if I have this tape here, the squeeze out will ooze onto the tape, and when I remove the tape, I'll capture most of that, and it'll leave me a pretty clean looking transition from the soundboard to the bridge. I won't have a lot of goopy glue to clean up. I'm also going to do a little bit of scraping. The part that I masked off wasn't quite right to the edge of the bridge because I don't want to take a chance on exposing bare wood. So I'll just scrape this little bit all the way around. And that gets me pretty close to the edge with the bare wood. But I can't get right up to the tape because, again, I don't want to risk going a little too far and having bare wood show along the edge of the bridge. So what I like to do with my bridges before I glue them on is to chamfer just a little edge right along the perimeter, and it, in my head anyway, it makes up for the fact that I've got like 2 or 3 mils of lacquer there. So I don't want the bridge to be sitting on that lacquer. I want it right down on the bare wood. So if I just put a little chamfer or bevel like that along the edge, I think it helps ensure contact with the majority of the bridge onto the bare wood. When I put the glue on, I don't want it oozing up into the bridge pin holes. So I always tape that off, and then the glue doesn't get into the pinholes. So start with a piece of masking tape. And then with a razor blade and a straight edge, I don't want all that tape there, I just really want to cover the holes. Alright, now I'm ready to glue. I have this clamping caul, pretty much the same shape as the bridge plate. Well, it's bigger, but it fits right in between the legs of the X-brace. I've got some non-stick tape here, so that with some instruments, like replace or bridge repairs especially, the holes will already be there, and even though I mask those holes off like this tape is just so that if any glue oozes down onto the bridge or into the bridge plate, my clamping caul won't get stuck. So I'm going to reach in and tape this to the bridge plate on the inside, and then that'll give me something to clamp against. Well, that was a little harder than expected because of this fretboard extension into the hole. I could barely get my hand in there, but it's in place. So now I'm gonna glue this bridge. I generally use woodworker's glue to glue bridges on. Sometimes people request hide glue, and I'm fine with using it, but I don't see where it really offers much of an advantage over yellow glue in most cases. If I'm doing a restoration on a vintage instrument, then I'll certainly use hide glue. But for new guitars or no preferences specified, then I usually go with the yellow glue. So I'll get a little bit of squeeze out here, but hopefully not make a huge mess. So that goes there. Then I'll put this clamp in. And there's the clamp, and this. Alright, and that's that. In a few minutes, after the squeeze out crust's over, I'll peel the tape off and then just let this sit for the day. The tape gave me a nice clean edge along there. There's going to be very little cleanup to do after the glue hardens and the clamp comes off. So thank you for watching. Hope it was worth your time.